Sounds good. So welcome, everybody. You're here for the Hiring for Sales Success webinar. And I'm one of your co-hosts. My name is Patrick Hellenberger. I'm the COO over here at Bets Recruiting. I've been in SaaS technology on the finance side for about 15 years and am running, the Bets Recruiting business right now. I started my own company about 5 years ago. It was a sales forecasting platform. I ended up selling that. And then again, joined Bets about 5 years ago and have helped scale our business since. And I am joined with Shane, who I'll let introduce himself.
Thank you, Patrick. My name is Shane McCauley. I'm currently an executive residence at Scale. Most recently, I was running the people and places function at a company called Motive. It does the logistics technology. And before that, Google, Twitter, Nike, Tesla, Johnson & Johnson. I'm starting out in competition, then expanding out as my career progressed. So I've been in the space for a while. Looking forward to chatting with y'all today. I'd like to hand it over to Anisha from Scale next.
Cool. I will just do a quick intro into who we are and why we're here. But I'm Anisha Agarwal. I work on Scale's go-to-market platform team, and we like to help our portfolio and friends of the portfolio build and optimize go-to-market machines. So we like to help across the go-to-market lifecycle, whether that's sales or marketing, SDR, customer success. We get lots of questions about hiring, which is why we bring in friends of the portfolio like Bets to put on events like these. And in terms of what that looks like, so on the next slide, you'll see, I'll start on the right side. So events are a big part of what we do. So things like today, where you get to interact with experts from both Scale internally, like Shane, or like Patrick. And we'll do these pretty often. Content, so we have about 70 tools and templates across the go-to-market lifecycle, growing every day. And then advisory is the last piece that we help with, which is people will come to us and have a challenge. And we, either try to solve it internally, or we bring in friends of the portfolio to help solve any challenges you're facing across the lifecycle. We like to do the pitch because not everyone knows that we exist and that we have these offerings right now. But we're here to help. We like to help. So bring us your challenges, easy, hard, whatever, we like to solve them. So with that, I will turn it back over to Patrick and Shane. Feel free to reach out to me or Shane after this if you guys need anything.
Amazing. And on the Bets side, we've been around for about 14 years. A lot of people might have heard of us, but over the last 4 or 5 years, we've really reinvented the model in which we help companies scale their go-to-market teams. We call that recruiting as a service. And that's the best of both a platform subscription plus full service recruiting combined into one. So for one flat fee subscription, Bets is able to help support all of your go-to-market hiring, which is really the first cost-effective model for early stage all the way through, the Motives of the world, later stage companies looking to hire 50 to 100 people. And so we're going to kick off today, really focusing on three topics, let's say, rethinking the sales organization, recruiting for that sales organization, and then retaining for that sales organization. But before we do that, I want to level set with where are we getting this data from? It's not just Shane and I making things up here. It really is a big data set that we've compiled at Bets. And before we do that, I'll lay out the agenda. So again, the rethinking, we're going to focus on job design, recruiting side. Everyone is right now trying to find your perfect seller. We're dubbing that the unicorn seller. And then retaining your team, something Shane and I are both really, really passionate about that we'll be chatting about as well. So to that data, so Bets currently has about 220 clients. We've worked with over 8,000 startups, and I wanted to break down what that looks like. So you can see we have a pretty big spectrum on the venture series. So a lot in seed, series A, series B, but for the amount of companies in series C and IPO, we actually have a really good amount, specifically right now on the IPO side, a good amount in private equity. And then as always, we have non-venture companies as well. Our roles we focus on SDR, AE, CSM, enterprise, kind of always been a core at Bets. But what is interesting is that the enterprise, we have way more jobs than we've ever had in the past as a percentage of our whole. Same with leadership as well, and exec search, meaning that one of the big things we're going to be talking about is up-leveling of organizations and a lot of people moving up market. And that's something we're seeing obviously in our data as well. So to kick off the rethink portion, I want to take a step back and just give you kind of a glimpse into where Bets was from a client perspective 5 years ago. 80% of our clients were what we would consider standard SaaS, and that, can be anything from like the Ubers of the world to, a SaaS company selling to another tech SaaS company. But it was a very simplified portfolio of companies we were working with. And what happened in that time frame is the plug and play rep was born, right? And that rep who could go from one company to another was created. We created all these sales methodologies about making them as efficient as possible. And it worked for a long time. But what we've seen over the last year and a half is a pretty big transition within our portfolio and within our clientele. Now this is what it looks like. People in AI, of course, security, of course, but our third biggest category is manufacturing and supply chain. Fourth is government, GovTech, cloud, robotics, education, retail. Only about 15% of our clients we would consider traditional SaaS. And what's happened because of this is you've created a market in which all of these candidates are now, or all of these companies are now trying to find hyper specialized sales folks to help them scale, but that market doesn't necessarily exist. And so we did a survey with all of our clients of the 223, about 100 responded, and we asked them, like, what is working for you in your sales motion right now? How are you rethinking your sales strategy? And there were some really interesting answers that came up. First, everybody is up-leveling their organization. 80% of our clients are either hiring that, first rep who is, they need the perfect hire, or Series C, Series D IPO companies are all up-leveling their organizations. We're going to talk a lot about that. But I think the place I want to focus today is really the manager sale and pricing-led growth. These are two components that I think are really interesting from Shane and I's perspective when looking at what's working in the sales motion today, because relationship-based selling is always going to work. Standard sales methodologies are going to work still for a lot of companies. And then a lot of other companies are just creative in what they're doing. So let's start with the pricing-led growth, PLG. Everyone knows product-led growth. Let's talk really quickly about pricing-led growth. For years, and just to note here, the PLG pricing-led growth model, we found that of that survey, the ones that was working for were SMB companies. So this isn't something that all these mid-market enterprise companies are adopting, but it's something to think about, because for years we've taught our sales reps through these standard methodologies, our SDRs through these standard methodologies, that when you're reaching out over email, that first email needs to be super quippy, super creative, get their attention, right? I get 2, 3, 4 of those a day, very well designed, very creative. A lot of time was spent, but I still have no idea what you do. And what we've seen with the market shift, right, with the tech recession we're in, with the market shifting in general, there's been a lot of layoffs. People are wearing multiple hats and don't have the same time to evaluate things as they did in the past. And so we see a huge fall off in engagement in these 8, 9, 10 step processes. And so what we're seeing internally at Bets that works, and our clients, about 9% of them, 10% of them agree, is that first email, what you should be doing is explain what you do, explain the product, and then break the number one rule of all sales to actually give pricing right off the bat, right? If it's an SMB sale, give them the information to make the decision of if they want to move forward immediately. We get about 20% response rates with this model. It's far less effort. It's far less annoying. And it's a model that in general has really worked. And yes, absolutely. Thanks, Anisha. Any questions, please throw those in the chat. And so it's very simple. Just be transparent. We've gone from this world of when email came out, it's like, here's what I do, here's what it is, long emails, to a very quippy world, 12 steps trying to get them to buy in, to, I think, a reversion back to just explaining the product and the pricing up front. Again, for simpler sells, right? This doesn't work for a complex multi-threaded sell. So the next thing we want to talk about, and I want to bring Shane in here, is really designing of the job. So 20 years ago, Salesforce and others at that size kind of created these swim lanes for the current SaaS sales roles. You have your SDR that does lead gen, AE, sales, manages, that sounds obvious, VP, scales, right? Each one of those roles is about 50% more expensive than the last. And if they're in their sales lanes, there's an efficiency that is gained by having that. What we've seen, and through this survey we did from our clients, we've seen a huge amount of crossover happening with smaller orgs, and still the same goal sets where AEs are flowing into the SDR realm, about 70% crossover at the max, meaning that AEs are doing 70% of that SDR job because that SDR is no longer there. Managers on 80% of some of our clients' calls, which is a case that can be made either way. And then VPs are now setting the baseline process, and not focused on scaling. And so I wanted to bring Shane in and ask, Shane, what are your thoughts on what you're seeing here about this trend?
Yeah, it's something I've noticed as well in the last few organizations that I've been a part of, and essentially as you're designing, these lanes, like just be intentional about how you're approaching what responsibilities fall where, not only with respect to the cost associated with it, as if you're paying an AE to do SDR work, like, are you optimizing, your cost of labor vis-a-vis what you need to get done, in terms of these roles and responsibilities. The other thing that this can lead to, and we'll talk about this again, I think, Patrick, in a minute, is burnout for folks that are in these roles. So as AEs are doing SDR work, as managers are doing AE work, and so on, you end up in a situation like this. I think this is an excellent kind of place to jump off next.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what our clients are saying to us, at least at Bets, is when we're talking to that CEO, they're saying, hey, it's working well with our manager involved in the sale of XYZ. We have our 4 reps under the manager and it's going well. But I think to your point, you have a real serious case of potential burnout, right, from those leaders. And while you're able to supplement some of those those sales goals by increasing close rates in the interim, you risk a lot down the line of, if you lose that manager, you have a team that's not trained and no one to lead them. So it's a really interesting dynamic of which way you really should be going.
Yeah, sorry, Patrick. It's important in the context of thinking about this to, again, be intentional about what work you expect to be done by whom. And if you end up in a situation, to Patrick's point, where the manager rolls out and they're, the folks under them aren't trained, then that's going to put pressure on, whoever's next up the chain. And so the worlds that I've been in, like if someone attrits on the AE side, the manager is still carrying the quota. So as you end up in a situation where you have ratios that don't afford an opportunity to train up your staff, you can quickly end up in a situation where you're having to, scramble to cover, creating more burnout, and it creates a bit of a chain reaction in terms of attrition. So you have to be really careful about how to do that. So you always want to think about building resilience into your organization, sustainability into your organization, so that if one piece, happens to rotate out, you have a solve for that. And the best way, to me, of doing that is to make sure that you have a thoughtfully designed sort of manager AE ratio, training in place, and then you're making sure that you're not having too much of a transposition of responsibilities across the manager AE spectrum.
Makes sense. Yep, absolutely. And I thought it was just super interesting to see out of that survey that 80% of managers were on 50% more or more calls, and 50% of those managers were on 80% plus of their team's calls. That creates a big bottleneck in the organization when you're looking to scale. But I'm sure it helps, or I know it helps, the interim hitting of goals. So let's keep rolling and talk about our next item we want to rethink. And we're actually going to kind of move over to the recruit side here as we talk about up-leveling your organization. And again, Shane and I are dubbing this the unicorn seller. And we kind of have a different definition, I think, than a lot of people would expect out of this. But before we jump to, exactly what the unicorn seller is and how to recruit for them, it's really important to understand kind of where we are today. Shane pulled this job description for me, and I think it's just so emblematic of where SaaS is today. I think this job description was created by Salesforce 25 years ago, and we've all just stolen it year after year after year. And everyone, I literally goes in and just types in, tech sales job description, and this comes up. And what you get is this one size fits all jobs description. And what you get when you send out a one size fits all job description, you get everybody, right? And in this world we live in, like we showed, 85% of people are not looking for the one size fits all seller. And so it starts with the job description and finding the right way or redesigning that job description, pulling in things that really matter, not just things like, experience with pricing. Like anyone in a full cycle sale will have experience with pricing. So, Shane, I know you put some thought into this. Before I pass it over to you, I want to give the definition of a unicorn seller, but then I'd love to just hear from you how you think about that job description and how you would redesign it to actually go find the right person. And to set that stage, we're defining the unicorn seller as the perfect seller for your organization. That does not mean they're the perfect seller for every organization, and we want to be really clear about that. It's the perfect seller for your organization. So what are your thoughts here, Shane?
Yeah, I think, reflecting on that job description that was on the previous slide, that's the fastest way to publishing that is the fastest way to irritate your recruiting team and your hiring managers simultaneously. You're going to get way more candidates than you can screen. And the people that you screen from that to the hiring managers, you're going to have an issue with, okay, these aren't the right people that I'm looking for. So there's a degree of specificity that's super helpful, both from a candidate's perspective and from a recruiting team and from a hiring manager. So now, coming back to this, like the most important thing is to just be specific about what makes your particular, role and opportunity unique, and what are the skills that are actually required in order to do that. Be specific. So, if you look at what your sales motion looks like, do they have experience with respect to how you sell? And if you need that experience coming in, especially if you're a smaller organization or are limited from a training perspective, make sure that they have the skill set that you need coming in the door. Don't expect to be able to train them to do it. So, in the job description on what's required, document, make sure they have experience with the relevant sales motion. If industry experience, is critical to how you need to sell, document what type of industry experience is needed. What type of industries have you sold into? What type of products have you sold, into those industries? So again, be specific about that. And lastly, what are the core skills that you've noted based on who is exceptional in your organization today? What skills do they have? And then you find an exemplar internally, look at what they do well, and then attach that as a requirement to the job description so that across these three areas, you've been specific. You can help candidates screen themselves out. You can help your recruiting team send the best candidates to the hiring managers.
Absolutely. And so before we kind of jump to how do we actually find it, we want to just recognize that there's two real challenges in the market today. One is that the skill sets needed to be a great seller, to be the unicorn seller, are not necessarily prevalent across the entire go-to-market space. And that's, again, because we developed a plug-and-play system over the last 5-10 years that doesn't necessarily work today. So you're seeing candidates with some of the skill sets and others with some of the other skill sets. Finding your unicorn becomes more difficult. The other thing that's a challenge is that there's a lot of noise on the market. There's 200,000 people in the go-to-market space on the market today. Of those, only about 5% are a fit for your organization. And that's because everything has become specialized, right? Not everybody has gov tech experience. Not everybody has the experience to sell into manufacturing that you're looking for. And so those two challenges are what we're going to talk through over the next couple slides, and how to identify the skill sets and find the right talent. And so let's start with the skill sets that we came up with. So this is a scorecard, or the beginnings of a scorecard that Shane and I came up with. And we broke it down just by 3 roles: SDR, enterprise, management. And what you're seeing is all the skills under SDR. Those are the skill sets, at the base level that those SDRs should have. Enterprise is the SDR skills plus these enterprise skills, and then managers, some of these enterprise skills plus these management skills. The color coding is really, based on feedback we've gotten from clients, where they see kind of a consistent skill set: creativity for SDRs, analytical for enterprise, integrity, sales planning and forecasting. There's a million great tools for that. Everybody's gotten good at that. Where we see not as much skill set, where we see kind of that fine line, is coachability, sales EQ, IQ. Some have it, some don't. And then management, are they able to really motivate their teams? Where we don't see the skill sets is on the relationship building and resilience side for SDRs. We've had a remote culture for a long time. We don't have the same ability to build relationships as we did, and nor do we have the same resilience that might have once been there as well. When you look at industry knowledge, playbooks, problem solvings, all of those things are a maybe on the enterprise side. And then management, are they able to effectively scale their team? They've been working so closely with their AEs that model is, or that success has not been there for a lot of the managers we're seeing. And so how do you go about, interviewing for this? How do you go about sussing this out? And at first, it starts with that job description that Shane and I were talking about. And so maybe Shane, you could jump back in here and just kind of give us some examples of, hey, how would you actually build out a job description with relevant sales motion, industry experience, and what sales skills you would need?
First thing I would do is come off mute so I can actually talk. The next thing I would do is go ahead and throw that, do not do what Patrick mentioned. Don't Google, account executive job description. First, go find your top performer and, look at what are the things that they do. So start from the skills side. What are the things that they do that help them be successful? Then go look at, what experience they had prior to joining, and what skill sets have they developed since they've been with your organization. And then ultimately figure out what are the things that are unique about how you sell that are important to the success of an individual seller. Document those things as roughly as you need to, and then, start to frame them in the context of what you would see in a job description. So I've found it to be really effective to really work backward from, all right, let me find an exemplar that is high performing within the context of my organization, as opposed to starting externally. Start internally. What do we do well? Why is it unique to us? And then how can I explain that to someone so that we can screen out candidates that aren't that to find the one that we need? And if you do that and publish it that way, it will help a lot in making sure that you're getting the right fit for folks as they're coming in, and will reduce the noise for your recruiting and your hiring managers.
Yep. And one thing I'll say too is, if you're, a CEO of a seed Series A company and you don't have, this is your first hire, look at what you do, right? You just need to refocus on what you do and what you've done to be successful around the sales motion you've put in place. What industry experience that you understand is important to selling, and then what skill sets have you developed that have been really successful, and what skill sets do you not want to replicate, right? So I think there's a strong opportunity to realign under the relevant sales motion, industry experience, and then sales skills in an actual job description, instead of the one-size-fits-all qualifications. And so we're literally proposing laying that out in those 3 categories to make it very clear as we rebuild our job description from there. So how do you actually interview for these things, right? How do you test for creativity? How do you test for sales IQ or EQ? So we broke down the interview process into really 4 categories of being able to qualify candidates. We'll send this out after, so I'm not going to go through everything, but we broke it down into references, and references can come in the form of a peer. It can come in the form of management, a leader, a back channel. All of those things add value into the conversation. tests, right? A test can be as simple as a couple questions. It could be an actual Excel test for analytical side, sales forecasting and planning, an actual test. Let's whiteboard together on how to build this sales plan or forecast. Experience, you know, for like industry knowledge, sales playbook, have they done it? If they've been at a company for 4 years and that company's grown from 5 million to 20 million, they've been a part of that growth, right? That experience adds up and adds a lot of value. And then lastly, specifically on the sales side, is the role play. There's still a lot of value, even on the enterprise side, of doing some role play and having that real conversation. You can't do it with me. How are they going to do? Are you going to do it in the real world? So I think role playing is really important. And on the manager side as well, I think, when you talk about motivating a team, how do they talk to a team, right? How do they communicate with a team is incredibly important in having a role play, having them do it, maybe not to their peers, but another group, lends a lot of value. And so these are really the 4 tips and tricks that we have within the interview process. Always happy to, after the call, if anyone has any real questions on specific questions that they want to ask or need to ask, reach out to Shane or I.
One thing on that,
Yep.
real quickly, Patrick, is as you're going through and doing these things, make sure that whatever you put in place from a test experience role play perspective is as close as possible to what they'll actually be doing in the role. I cannot tell you how many times people are asking questions that relate to things that the person will never do, doesn't need to know. So just make sure that what tests you put in place and the role plays and the experience that you're looking for does mirror what they would actually need on the job. So I know it sounds basic, but I've seen it way too many times not to mention it here.
Yeah, so that chemistry test from 9th grade doesn't matter here. Yeah, that makes sense.
While impressive,
yeah, exactly.
not relevant.
Exactly. And so, and to that exact point, what you're talking about is consistency, right? And so I know you've used scorecards before, and a million people have talked about them. But give me your thoughts, Shane, on how important being consistent in the interview process is for identifying that unicorn.
If you're not consistent, it makes it very difficult to actually correctly and appropriately assess talent as you're coming in. So one thing that we've implemented, or I've been a part of implementing at every organization in which I've had this responsibility, is let's be consistent and clear about what topics are being covered by each interviewee during the interviewer during the process. And then make sure that you're being consistent about asking the same questions in the same way. I know it might get boring for you, but do it anyway. Because ultimately what you want to be able to do when you're evaluating a slate of candidates is to have the right input going into that decision so that you can make the best decision coming out of it. If you don't, if you go off piece and start talking about something that's not relevant to what you need to be doing, you're not going to have the right input to bring to the table when ultimately you're vetting candidates within the context of the hiring group to make the right decision here. So you want to be consistent about what you're asking. You want to ask the same questions to each candidate. You want to ask them in the same way. Ideally frame them behaviorally, so that you can get a little bit deeper into what their perspective is and what their skill set is there. But be consistent, be concise, and make sure that you're being consistent across all of your candidates and all of your interviewers to make sure you're getting the right outcome.
Yep. And so the last thing we'll leave you with on this is really the when in doubt on the recruit side. We always like to use the Tough Joe client test. There's probably a much better name for this, but it's, when you're interviewing somebody for a sales role, would you give them your toughest client and would they be successful? It's a really simple measure to put everybody against, literally a 1 through 10 scale, and understand where they would fall with your toughest client. Because the person who can problem solve, the person who could work with the toughest client, those toughest clients turn into your best clients in the end, once you win them over. So we always like to leave with like a little Tough Joe test. And so you've now kind of understand how to build the job description, what you're looking for, the skill sets to go after. Now it's really, can we afford it? And what's happened in the comp side of sales over the last year or so. So for the last 14 years, it's been just an upwards trajectory, almost growing 100% in the last 14 years. These are real numbers we pulled from us 14 years ago. That's why it's 14 years of where compensation was to today. And I think the 2 things to note here, if you're a big graph fan, are leadership is flat. And that's really interesting. We'll talk about that in a second. And that really ties into what Shane was talking about around job design. And then number two, there's a wealth gap happening with those with experience enterprise and those without. The entry-level position has fallen off a bit of a cliff, down about 10% this year, while enterprise is up about 15%. So those roles are coveted more than ever, as again, everybody's looking for their unicorn seller, and that's driving up those comp rates. And so I understand. So how we want to understand the market, we come out with a comp guide every year. And one of the things we put in it is really this target compensation. And this really ties back to the right seller for you and not overpaying for quality. There's a price point at which there's just diminishing returns that happen. And we see this all the time with clients who raise big funding rounds or whatever, looking to come in and just get the top talent at whatever costs. But that's not really the case with top talent. You hit a certain level, and those really expensive people aren't really top talent anymore for whatever reason. It just doesn't work out like that. And so you really want to think about your target compensation that works for you, and what size of candidate pool. Is that enough of a candidate pool for you to find your unicorn, right? 40%, 50% of the market's a lot of the market. That's a lot of people for an SDR. So you just need to find your target within that model. Any thoughts on this, Shane, on the overpaying for quality here?
Yeah, I think, what the way you framed it is the way that I've seen it work out as well. So when you identify, what skill sets you need and, what time you have to hire, that's where kind of these things intersect to figure out what you should be charging from a comp perspective. So, we've been in situations before, at least I have, where, the mandate was hire X number of AEs and Y number of days. So like, okay, what am I going to do that? We know what our current run rate is with what we've been offering relative to how long it takes to fill those roles. And if we're going to change one of those expectations, then we have to pull a lever to help do that. And so, what we did in our case to help get over the line, was, all right, well, we're going to offer, a sign-on bonus for X period of time during this approach so that we can affect this problem. Like, all right, we need to increase the size of our candidate pool, but we can't increase the size of our, fixed OTE over time, and we need to bring down our time to hire. So you have to think about what levers you need to pull to get the outcome that you're looking for. And ultimately, to Patrick's point as well on overpaying, for quality, top talent in one organization doesn't necessarily mean top talent in another. So, it may make sense for you to pay for someone else's success in a given another organization, or it may not. So, just be cognizant of what that means to you. And I've seen this all the time. Just because someone was successful at Google doesn't mean they're successful at Twitter. So just be thoughtful, or I guess whatever they want to call Twitter now. So just be thoughtful about, what you're doing, why it's relevant to you, and just be intentional. The worst thing to do in the situation is what Patrick said, is we have a bunch of money, just go hire whatever we want. That's not the right approach. Be intentional, be thoughtful, and make sure you're pulling the right levers to solve the problem that you have.
Absolutely. And I think the other way we kind of coach our clients is, there's what the average is. And then if you're looking, one thing we always like to note though, is if you're looking for that unicorn seller, I would have a little bit of additional budget set aside to help find that. Doesn't mean we'll need it, but you need to be kind of cognizant of the fact that if you're looking for someone who's got machine learning experience in manufacturing in Idaho, that person is pretty sought after by the 7 machine learning AI manufacturing companies in Idaho, So I think having that budget and understanding the difference between the average and getting creative and how to get somebody there is going to be important as you look for your unicorn seller over the next 6 to 12 months. And again, that's not saying that everybody needs to go spend 15% more, but you need to have those open and honest conversations with finance and have a plan to be creative, just like Shane said, of whether it's a sign-on bonus, whether it's additional equity, more upside on the commission. There's opportunities all over the place, but you need to be creative because that market at 5% of those 200,000 people is super sought after right now. And so that really leads to kind of our biggest point before we get into the retention side, is that right now, the supply side, you know, of in Q3 going into Q4 of these unicorn sellers. There's more out there than there is demand. So you're still in a really good place trying to find your unicorn seller. There's a lot of people on the market, a lot of people switching jobs, but that is going to change, right? There is one key fact about recruiting in go-to-market in technology is that segment is completely understaffed in comparison to the next 5 to 10 year growth goals across technology. And that supply and demand issue is going to become very, very real over the next 5 to 10 years until training, education, and other things catch up with this supply and demand. And so it's really, really important to retain your team, right? If you're not retaining the high quality people you've brought on, you know, you're going to struggle to keep up in this market. And I want to point out that right now at Bets, we have about 55,000 active candidates within our network, within our platform Connect. That's 2 times the candidates same time last year. And a lot of people will probably say, hey, you know, we've had a lot more layoffs this year. You know, that's probably making up the majority. And it makes up about 27, 28% of that, but 73% of those candidates have not been laid off. They are coming from all tech industries, all sizes of companies. And I think what that shows, right? And Shane and I have talked about this a bunch, that New York Times article that came out of the Great Resignation is over. I don't think that's true in tech. I think there's a big gap in what we think the growth of this industry is going to be versus where we are today. And here's just some of the reasons people are looking. Layoffs being the number one. It's not people being laid off, it's people seeing their friends get let go or their peers get let go, thinking there's instability within the company. That's a challenge, right? Not hitting quota. That's another situation that's happening far more frequently than anyone cares to admit in technology. Culture has taken a big hit as we've slashed expenses, slashed you know, spend in general. Attrition, this is just a natural attrition. So not even for companies who have done layoffs, 1 or 2 people leave, other people start looking around and saying it's my time to go as well. And I think the biggest, you know, thing, it's not the biggest number, but the most glaring for me is the leadership changes, right? There's been a lot of leadership change across technology, and that really shakes up an organization. Where that happens, there's a big long tail delayed effect. What are your thoughts on some of these trends, Shane?
Yeah, I think these kind of, for me, bucket into, you know, confidence in ability to do job, confidence in organization, from a sustainability perspective, and just from a doing right by employees perspective. You know, and the thing that's unfortunate about a lot of these things is it can build momentum. So when you think about attrition or layoffs, like a combination of that uncertainty that was generated from layoffs or leadership changes, like then leading to attrition, which then makes all of the other people around you have more work to do, which puts more load on them, which makes them more likely to leave. You know, so there's just a cascading effect that can happen as these things like multiply, like, and the effect of them to me multiplies, it doesn't add. So you have to be really cognizant of what you're going to do to stem the tide on some of these things as they invariably happen. And also, as you know, as Patrick mentioned, there are a lot of candidates that are active, you know, and back to the notion that like that we don't have to worry about people leaving organizations anymore. Good talent is always mobile. So, you know, you have to be thinking about, you know, re-recruiting your teams. What are their needs? What are they looking for? What would cause them to pick up the phone? You know, and these are some great, you know, reasons why someone might be looking. So if you see any of these things in your organization, you know, be wary of that.
Yeah, it's like in these types of webinars, we are like at Bets always invariably get asked, like, aren't we like causing this problem? And I always respond, I've actually never responded to this, but I've always thought about responding with it's like a relationship, right? If the girl leaves for another guy, you don't blame that other guy. It's the guy who she left's fault. You know, it's like, what could we have done better? And I think it's something that companies just need to look internally of. If people are leaving, they're going to leave whether they come to Bets or not, right? It's one of those scenarios where they need to look internally at what they can do. And so I guess to that tune, what are some of the tips and tricks you've seen, obviously being at some of those great companies, to retain top talent?
So when we look at reasons for leaving and attrition, like the reasons that I've seen as far as I've been researching this question have been fairly consistent. So thankfully, a few years ago, I was presented with an opportunity to spend quite a lot of Twitter's money to build a model that I actually thought was fairly interesting in this regard. And unsurprisingly, like if you look at the things that you can control as a manager and as an organization that drive attrition, it's four main things. So to what extent does someone feel like the role they have connects to an organization's goals? To what extent are they able to achieve those goals? Are they satisfied with their work? And do they like the team they work with? It's pretty basic, unsurprising. But it does tie back to a lot of the reasons for leaving that Patrick mentioned on the previous slide. So, and a lot of those things can be assessed in the context of a single conversation, a fairly short conversation, I might add. So, it's a very good idea to just spend some time, like in a one-on-one every so often, schedule it if you need to remind yourself to do it, but check in on how folks are doing across those four areas. Do they understand why their job is important? Can they achieve their objectives? Do they like their job? And do they like their team? Pretty straightforward. And if you can say yes to all four of those things, you're much less likely to leave than someone who doesn't. So,
Love that. And yeah, and I think, there's all these, we listed a couple tips and tricks up here. Some of them are kind of like new age with therapy and coaching. Some are just very simple and have been at the core, like finding your team members' motivation for years. But I think in the end, one of the biggest things we see when we talk to candidates is that it's not about how you act and how you handle things as a leader in the good times. When the money's flowing and everybody's doing great, everyone's winning, you're going to have good times, but it really is who you are and how you act and how you lead during the bad times that leads to high retention, right? That is when you build a ride or die team, is when you coach, build, motivate, support them through the low times. That is when you build a hot ride or die team, not when it's everybody's successful, everybody's doing well. That's it's great, everybody's excited. When the cracks start to show, that's your opportunity to be a leader, right? That's when you have the choice of bailing or pushing through, and that adversity is what make great leaders and great companies.
Yeah, and one last thing on that point, Patrick. Like the pendulum, like in terms of like where the power is held within an organization from sort of the organization to labor, has been swinging back and forth rather wildly as of late. And so I think what's interesting is like as costs, as money has become less available, as things have tightened up, like the organizations have a little bit more control, and like how they choose to exercise that control right now will be a huge determinant of what happens to your organization when that graph that Patrick showed earlier about the demand curve changing comes to fruition, which it will. Like, so you want to be on the right side of history here, because the decisions that you're making now about how you treat your team will manifest in attrition 3 months from now. So just be aware of that and, do the right thing. And if you're in a position where you're, constrained with resources, be transparent about why you're doing what you're doing so that people understand. Because if they don't understand, someone else will provide them an explanation that doesn't work for your organization and they will leave. So, be cognizant of re-recruiting your team, find the thing that matters to them, and make sure that you're at least being clear about what's happening in the organization if you don't have the resources to achieve some of these things that are here.
Yep, totally aligned. And I think the thing that stood out to me that you just said is it'll happen in 3 months. And I think that's the thing within technology. It moves so quickly that, this control pattern, you don't have 5 years with this. This isn't manufacturing or something where it's just been laid out. This is technology. I talk to mid-market enterprise companies that don't know their hiring plans for the next 6 months, just 3 months, right? And I think that's a really good point of where we are, that the pendulum can shift that quickly within technology. And so let's wrap this up with really, 3 core foundational items in ways in which we think you can continue to expand in what is a stagnant market. And I think first, in the rethinking of job design, I'll pass that back over to you, Shane, of what you think your key takeaway is from a job design perspective to keep then keep moving forward.
Yeah, be clear about what your needs are, be clear about what are the skills required to meet those needs, and then go find the talent that has those capabilities. So, and be cognizant of cost. So it really is important. Like, all these pieces need to fit together in order for it to make sense. So make sure that you're taking a holistic approach to thinking about how you're designing the work. That includes, cost, design of the job itself, and making sure that you have a strategy to bring that all together.
Absolutely. On the second item, it would be up-leveling your organization. And I think, the key takeaway there as you think about up-leveling organization, it really just ties back into what Shane was just saying. It really is just, it's job design, understanding your job description, and then really just understanding the skill sets, industry experience, sales motion you're looking to go after. By understanding that, you're giving yourself a huge head start versus 80% of companies out there which post still the 1+ year of SaaS experience, when you're not looking for that, right? You're doing that to expand the people coming to you, but in the end, you're never going to find exactly what you're looking for. And so focus is really the key takeaway as you up-level your organization. And then, lastly, it's really retaining that team. And I guess, Shane, what would be your key takeaway for retention these days?
It's thankfully the same as it's always been. Like, spend a little bit of time, get to know your team, and get to know what each individual needs, and do what you can to meet those needs. And if you can't, be clear about why. It's not complicated. It's the same as in the context of any relationship. Why are both parties involved? What do both parties need? Figure out a way to get to a point where, it's mutually beneficial to be doing what you're doing. If it's not, people will opt out. So, and even if you do everything right, there'll be times where there are other things that affect that situation. That's, that doesn't mean you shouldn't keep doing the right thing. But it just is super important to understand, what your team needs, treat them and look at them as individuals, and do your best to meet their needs.
Yep. I know, in such a complicated market, a lot of the answers are still really simple. It's just about consistency and actually implementing them, Well, we do have one question before we go. So I did want to read that question. So if you're a smaller company hiring for a full-time sales plus success role, how would you title it and define the role for it? Unsure of the split, best practices, salary ranges, that makes sense. Growth trajectories, that makes sense. It's a pretty loaded question. But Shane, do you want to give a little context? And then I think the real answer is, ping Shane or I later, and we can, help you build out that job description and build that out at a later date. But do you have any initial thoughts on that?
I haven't hired or for a role that was combining sales and success. Like, all of the organizations that I've been at, unfortunately, we parse those out. So I'm not sure of what that would be. Certainly could help, dig up some salary benchmarks, Patrick. If you could help kind of define, I'm sure you have some JDs that you've seen for that combination. But unfortunately, I just don't. But I could help out on the salary side if it would be helpful if you ping me later.
Yeah. And I think that's I think a larger discussion's needed of job design in general, right? Is that the right role for you? Is it really to combine both of those roles? As we both know, job creep can create mediocrity across both roles, right? Or is it start with an account executive now who has the ability to expand accounts, bring on a CSM later once that person's successful? So I think there's a lot of opportunity in there to have a really interesting discussion. I don't think we'll get to that answer today. But please reach out to Shane or I after, and we can literally walk you through, our thought process there. And then Stephen asked, if you've read the book Who, can you speak to how the concept of the scorecard plays into your recommendations about job description design? Have you read the book, Shane?
Unfortunately, Stephen, I have not read that. So Patrick, have you?
No, I have not. So it's going to be a pretty mediocre answer.
We'll do our best.
If you're still there, if you have any
additional
additional context, that would be great. If you're still here, or else, yes, please. Shane and I are going to go head out to our book club right after this and read the book Who, and then we'll get back to you, Stephen. So
But I mean, but in terms of thinking about, you know, scorecard and job description design, like there should be a linkage between the things that you're asking for or the things that you're expecting the person to do, you know, that you're speaking to in the JD, and then how you're evaluating them internally. So,
Yep.
you know, if how you're evaluating someone and what's in your scorecard isn't reflected in your job description, then one of the things is wrong. So, having not read the book, but like if there isn't an alignment there, then you're doing yourself a disservice because of the thing I mentioned earlier. Like you want to be able to use a JD as a screening tool. So, you know, yeah, perfect. So yes, so there should be an alignment there between what you're asking for the person to be able to do and what you're evaluating them on. And if those two things are not aligned, like you need to change one of the two things.
Yeah, it's a process, right? I think that was the layout. It build a job description. The scorecard can be built off of those skill sets needed, and then you utilize those two things as your screening mechanism, and then your, you know, placing mechanism for the candidate, and they align so that there's no confusion to who's applying and who's making it further in the process as well. All right, appreciate the questions. Oh, yeah, I'm definitely gonna have to read it.
Yeah,
Steve.
we will do. All right, book club, Patrick.
Yep, exactly.
What are you doing right now? Let's do this.
Let's just do the book club. Well, I appreciate you so much for joining, Shane.
Thank you.
Thanks for everybody attending. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.